Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1978 horror sequel, Damien, Omen II. Now, if you ask me, this sequel is an underrated gem. I actually like this the most out of all of the Omen films. That's just me personally. And I will explain why I feel that way soon enough. And I think it still holds up really well after all these years. It's directed by Don Taylor, and the original director for this was Mike Hodges, but he was replaced after like a couple weeks of shooting because he had a very meticulous way of handling the film. So when it comes to shooting certain scenes, he would take a really long time on sequences that were just kind of establishing shots or scenes that weren't necessarily needing to take as much time to shoot. And yeah, he had a very painterly approach. He was approaching the film as if he was a painter and he was creating a masterpiece. And I think that approach definitely can work if you don't have a deadline or you have more time to shoot. But this isn't one of those films. So the more time that he was taking to just get one shot of Damien walking in front of some flames, the more behind they got when it comes to the shooting schedule, and I think that's ultimately why Hodges was replaced with Don Taylor, because Don Taylor was known as a guy who can get it done quick. And all of that being said, I've heard from people involved with the film, and they have talked about what his vision was going to be. And I wish that Fox had more patience because I think Don Taylor still did a terrific job, considering the circumstances. But I do wish that Fox had more patience with Mike Hodges because his idea to really flesh out Damien's struggle with realizing his fate and realizing who he is and how that affects him and those around him, and beefing up other supporting characters like Lance Henriksen's character in the film. I think that really could have paid off. And also having a different approach and when it comes to the suspense and the thrills and the horror, and not making it so obvious and blunt, and making it essentially a slasher movie, because that's really what Damien Omen 2 is a slasher film. And I think that's something that turns off some people, and that's something that I like about the movie. It makes it a really entertaining, fun film to watch, but you do lose a certain amount of intensity because the more and more you just show more kills and more gratuitous murders, the less impact those scenes have. And it doesn't get under your skin as much as the first Omen film did. And I think that that's really what Hodges wanted to do. He wanted to make a film that was a lot closer to the first Omen film. And the producers in the studio, they had different ideas and wanted to make it a body count movie. And you know, that that is definitely something that I think in some respects works, but I honestly would have liked to have seen more of a combo of both. And it kind of seems like that's the direction that Hodges was wanting to go in. Like, he wanted to be more thoughtful, a little bit more artistic, but he also wanted to deliver the goods when it comes to the kills and things like that, because that was a big selling point when it comes to this franchise. Because after the first Omen film came out, a lot of people were just talking about the deaths, the imaginative, creative kill scenes. But yeah, Don Taylor still did a good job for a guy who came in, had to essentially kind of start from scratch and really ingratiate himself with the cast and crew and come in with a different style and a different vision and also get the film done on time. He still wound up turning in the film a little bit later than I think he wanted to. So it still wound up being like a day or two late. But considering that he came in pretty late into production, that was still a really efficient job by Don Taylor. And I think he's a decent director too. I think there's still some nice looking shots in this. The sequences that take place in the archaeological dig that open up the film, uh, anything involving a spectacular death scene is shot really well, especially the elevator scene with a young Meshach Taylor, um, and the ice skating sequence on the frozen lake. Like that was a really a genuinely nail biting and just really well shot sequence. And yeah, overall, I do feel Don Taylor did a really good job directing it. And even some of the scenes that were just kind of building character or setting things up, even some of the boardroom scenes, there were just there were scenes in the film that visually were really solid. But you could tell the difference between what Don Taylor did and what Mike Hodges had done previously, because Mike Hodges' work is still in the movie, and you could just tell when he was the one behind the camera versus Don, because he did have a much more rich, layered sense of detail and visual style. So his shots are the nicest looking. Don Taylor's shots are solid, they're good, but they don't have the same visual wow factor as Mike Hodges' shots do. And Hodges just seemed to be a guy who really was able to frame shots in a more unique way compared to Don Taylor. The screenplay by Stanley Mann and Mike Hodges, I think is really good, despite the fact that Hodges wasn't the one behind the camera anymore to adapt his story, to adapt his script. A lot of the heart and the soul of his screenplay is still on the screen. I really like the fact that Damien is a teenager who is just about to enter puberty and has a lot of questions about his future. And I like how it introduces Damien as just a regular teen at first, who's genuinely starting to form a real bond with his cousin, and they really do come across like they're brothers. And it just seems like there is hope that, oh, maybe, like some of those serial killers would be serial killers. Maybe if they were raised a certain way, maybe they wouldn't turn out bad. Maybe they could change. And so it was refreshing to see Damien just be normal. I thought it was a really good way to start the film and the story, of at least when it comes to focusing on Damien. Uh, the stuff with Bugenhagen I liked as well at the archaeological dig, especially the discovery of the wall that has Damien in various different forms as he grows older. I thought that was a great concept, and I thought it was executed really well by the production designer. And the whole scene where Bugenhagen is taking his colleague to try to show him the proof that this young boy Damien is the Antichrist, it's got some genuine tension to it. It's actually fairly suspenseful, and then after that scene, you get a lot of the military school stuff with Damien, which I also felt was a nice touch. That was different. That was a different setting. You don't see a lot of films like this that take place in a military school. The only other one I can kind of think of is Child's Play 3, which is another underrated sequel, if you ask me. And you get a sense that Damien's starting to become aware that he's got some special abilities. Um, but I like how in the script, like when he first showcases this power, he's confused and he's not necessarily that comfortable with it. Like he's very unnerved by it. Even Damien himself is unnerved by his ability to uh, cause havoc to this one kid at the school who was bullying him. And I like the build up where you see Damien showcasing his abilities in different ways. One that I really liked is the scene where he shows up this teacher who is trying to make an example out of Damien, and Damien just schools him in front of the entire class because the guy's just asking him all these questions, all these historical questions about when so and so died or when this war started. And there's just this great back and forth between Damien and the teacher's like, well, how about this one? And then Damien will just like rapidly just give the answer, and then they just keep going back and forth, and the teacher's more and more exasperated and more freaked out until one of Damien's keepers, in a way, Sergeant Neff takes him aside and tells him, "Hey, you can't do this. There's a time and a place for it, but it's not right now." And that's where you get, in my opinion, like one of the best scenes in the screenplay is this moment where Neff tells Damien about the Book of Revelations, and it causes Damien to actually go and find a Bible and look up the Book of Revelations and see the passages about the Antichrist. And then it makes him look for the mark of the beast on his own head, and he finds it. And he runs away in terror and tries to run away from that responsibility. The script is way deeper and more complex and has more depth than people give it credit for. And that's honestly the reason why it's my favorite Omen film, is because of this aspect of it. It just makes it so much more compelling, especially the scene where he confronts Mark, his cousin, and Mark knows about Damien now. He knows who Damien is. And Mark is terrified of Damien now. And who wouldn't be? But, he's still conflicted because he does have some semblance of love for Damien, like a brother. And he just feels betrayed, and he is just confused and just befuddled. He doesn't know what to do. And Damien confronts him in the woods, and he's trying to get through to Mark, and he's basically trying to get Mark to agree to join him on the dark side. And Mark just refuses to do it. And it leads to a scene where Damien has to kill his cousin. And he actually is visibly conflicted and hurt by this, by the fact that he has to kill him. And he kills him, and then he screams in anguish. And it just humanizes Damien in a way that the original didn't do, the first film, and none of the other films in the series ever did. And in that moment, I actually got choked up, and I actually felt some sympathy for the Antichrist. That's a great script. Make you feel sympathy for the Antichrist in that moment. Um, but I will admit the script isn't completely all elements like this. There are some stuff that is, I guess you would consider cliched, or just scenes that are just there for gratuitous violence and gore, and to just add another body to the body count. But I think there's a good balance of those scenes and the scenes that provide depth to Damien as a character, as well as the other characters. Like I think the relationship between Richard and Anne is also really strong. That's what makes Anne's turn at the end uh, so much more shocking and so much more powerful. Uh, and I even like the stuff that just deals with like the politics at the Thorn Corporation with Paul, this guy who's rising in the ranks in Thorn's company, and he's got very questionable policies and ideas that are definitely not moral, or they don't fit within what we would consider to be the normal moral code. And as the film goes on, you find out there's a reason for that, because he's a part of the cabal that's trying to help Damien and raise Damien and put Damien on this path to be the Antichrist, or at least the best Antichrist that he can be. And yeah, I think there's some really good scenes there where it's talking about using the corporation to control the world's food supply and profit off of famine. And that's actually something that's expanded upon in the final conflict. So it's not like it's something that's just a throwaway bit. And it's also something that makes you think about, man, that's pretty messed up. And then you think about it some more and you're like, you know what? That's actually something that happens now. These corporations profiting off of water, off of basic necessities. Like, this is not something that's just a pipe dream. This isn't a fantasy out of a horror sequel anymore. Like, this is reality. And that's pretty horrifying when you think about it. And there's even other characters. Like, there's this other guy who he's like a doctor, and he's friends with Richard, and he's the one that tries to introduce this uh, aide of Bugenhagen's named Joan Hart, who was involved. Well, I don't know if she was an aide of Bugenhagen. She was just aware of Bugenhagen's work, and she worked in the same field and went on location. Not location, it's the wrong word, but she went out to the same place that Bugenhagen was doing the dig at in the beginning of the film, and found all these archaeological pieces. And she's the reason why these pieces are being donated to the museum that Thorn is going to provide to the museum. And she's also the one that knows that there's something really off about Damien. And she's not the only one. I mean, Damien's aunt is also another one, Aunt Marion, who is the first one to fall victim to uh, the devil. And the Joan Hart scene, like her death scene with the birds and her getting her eyes pecked out and then getting hit by that truck, like that was a pretty intense and visceral scene. And honestly, that whole sequence looked like something out of a giallo horror movie, with her wearing the red outfit and everything. And I do like how things just progressively get more and more crazy. At least it seems like it when it comes to some of the kills. There are some moments though where it's not as intense, but I like how there's like a build up to things. And I also like how there are other moments where it's a little bit more subdued. Like the guy, the Dr. Warren, when he gets crushed by the train, Or even like the scene where Bill Averton, who is the guy who's in the way of the hand-picked CEO who's going to take over Thorn and have it in a good place so Damien can just step in. So Paul, he's the one that's next in line, but Averton is in the way, and Averton doesn't like his ideas. He agrees with a lot of people that they're just immoral and way too controversial, and he doesn't want to implement them. And that leads to a scene where he's along with all these other guys and these kids, and they're playing ice hockey on a frozen lake, and he falls through. And it's a simple concept, but it's still very harrowing. Just and the way it's shot is just amazing. It really is. Like with the stunt man who's like under the ice, and you can see him under the ice. Like this is not a fake thing. Like this isn't a camera trick or anything. This is a stuntman who's actually under the ice in freezing cold water and holding his breath for like 2 to 3 minutes as he's just floating along under the ice in this freezing cold lake. And yeah, it's definitely a script that delivers when it comes to those kind of moments. I mean, one of them is already pretty well known when it comes to a lot of fans of this series and just fans of horror in general. Meshach Taylor's death with the elevator when the elevator cable snaps and flies through the roof of the elevator and cuts him in half. And I think the climax is pretty memorable because it's a really effective twist. Because when I first saw this, I did not see it coming. I did not think for a second that Anne was on Damien's side and was going to betray her husband like that when he's trying to get her to give him the daggers so he can kill Damien, because now he's realized who Damien is and he's trying to stop Damien from taking over, because if he dies, Damien's just going to get his fortune. Damien's going to get Thorn, because that's the way the things are set up, and and he's trying to prevent that from happening. But his wife had other ideas, and I also like how the script is just doubly ruthless at the end. It's like, nah, you're not living either, and you're gonna get burned alive. You're like, oh man, that's that's pretty messed up, but I got to give you props for that because I that's kind of unexpected too, where Damien's just like, nah, you burn too, uh, and I like that in a way is a finalization of Damien's transformation, where he truly has burned away the last vestiges of his humanity. And there's already moments like that, like when he has to kill Mark. Um, but yeah, it just adds so much to the film. Like I do think that it probably wouldn't have played out as well as it did without that ending. I think that ending was really good, and the shot of Damien just walking out of the museum with this confident smirk on his face while the museum is on fire and sirens are in the background, and just calmly, coldly walks up to his limo. It was a great setup for, Damien growing up and becoming the deadly CEO of Thorn Industries many years later. Yeah, I legitimately thought this script is really really good. The only problems I had with it were really minimal. Like there was some stuff, like there was a letter that Bugenhagen wrote, and it was supposed to be given to Richard Thorne. And uh, Dr. Warren, he finds the box that was supposed to be given to Richard. It has the 7 knives of Megiddo in it, and it has all the letter. And he gives the letter to Thorne, has a very heated conversation with him about it that Mark hears, and that's why Mark knows about Damien and who he is. Um, but you never hear what the letter was, and I feel that was a missed opportunity. I think that you should have at least known what the letter said, because it definitely helped convince Richard to at least start to investigate on his own, try to find the piece of the wall that supposedly shows Damien on it, and that's what leads to him and Dr. Warren, going to the train to find the wall before it gets delivered to I believe it was like, yeah, to New York or some other place in I think, yeah, it was in New York. Yeah, I think it was going to New York. It was gonna, it was Yagel's wall. It was being stored in a cargo carrier. Um, but yeah, that was definitely something that I felt worked for the most part. But like I said, I would have liked to have seen more. I wanted to know what that letter was about, and I was a little bit disappointed that we didn't get that. Also, I would have liked to have seen a few more scenes in the military school, especially with Lance Henriksen's character, Neff, really build up the relationship between him and Damien, uh, show Damien interacting with other kids at the military school a little bit more. I would have liked to have seen that. I think that would have helped the story and would have made it a little bit more consistently compelling overall. Made it so it wasn't just a film where you're just waiting to see who's going to die next and how they're going to die. But like I said, I still think it's a pretty effective screenplay, and even the idea of just changing the animal that is in the grip of Damien and the devil that's being used to set up all these deaths, changing it from a dog to a raven. I believe it's a raven. It could be a crow, but I think that was a really good choice because it made for some really striking scenes. And I honestly, I think this is a creepier animal than the bird is creepier than a Rottweiler. And I wish they kept that going for the rest of the series, where Damien would utilize a different animal as the series went on. But instead, they just went back to dogs, which I thought was lazy. So for a screenplay and a film that gets a lot of criticism for being lazy, which I don't think it's really lazy at all, it sure does a lot of unique, different things for this franchise and for these characters. And I think the cast is great. I mean, William Holden, who originally was asked to play the lead in The Omen, but turned it down. He does a really good job in this. His character is very charismatic. You buy that he's a loving, kind husband as well as father to Mark and to Damien. The relationship between him and his wife seems to me more plausible and seems a lot stronger than the relationship between the husband and wife in The Omen, which makes Anne Thorne's turn all the more upsetting. And Lee Grant, I thought, did a really lovely job. I thought she was really charming, and there were certain scenes where she definitely was showing a little bit of an edge and showed some things about her personality that raised some red flags, but it wasn't in a way that was just blindingly obvious. So she did a good job, being subtly uh, uh bad or immoral in some scenes and the way that she reacts to certain things. Um, but Jonathan Scott Taylor, who I believe was a relative newcomer, and I don't think he had done a whole lot before this. He is the standout here as Damien. I thought he was fantastic. I thought his performance was really good. I thought he was very charming and charismatic and funny and likable early on when he's bonding with Mark and his dad and his mom, and did a great job creating this false sense of security, almost like, okay, things are safe here. I know it's an Omen film, but it just this just feels like a good place. I like you actually want to get to know Damien. Like, you want to be friends with him based on what you see early on, and what Jonathan is able to bring to the character. But what makes this performance so good is that there's so many different layers to it. So he effectively shows that side of Damien, but he also shows the side of Damien who's uh, dealing with these inner demons that are starting to arise, and he's dealing with his fate and finding out what his fate is supposed to be, and him reacting to it, and just all these different emotions that Damien is going through. And I just feel that the performance is absolutely terrific, and Jonathan just does not get enough credit for what he did in this film. um Robert Foxworth, I also thought, did a really good job as Paul, this steely-eyed, just chilly CEO. He's very driven and has his own way of showcasing his evil that gets under your skin, makes your skin crawl. Lew Ayres was good as Bill Averton. Sylvia Sidney, who was in Beetlejuice, she was also pretty good in her little role as Aunt Marion. Nicholas Pryor, I thought, was really great as Dr. Charles Warren. Good example of an actor doing a lot with not a lot of screen time. Elizabeth Shepard also did some fine work as Joan Hart. Lance Henriksen, I know he didn't have the best time doing the film, so we got along with Mike Hodges more. And I believe his role was going to be uh, more extensive, but it was cut down. So I get what he means by not having the best experience, but it was still a good performance from a young Lance Henriksen. Leo McKern was also good as Carl Bugenhagen in the beginning. Lucas Donat, I thought, also did some good work as Mark Thorne. Even Alan Arbus as David Passerian, or Meshach Taylor. Um, so yeah, it's a good cast, and well shot by Bill Butler. Some good editing by Robert Brown. The score by Jerry Goldsmith's not quite up to the same par as his score in the first film, but it's still some good work, some solid work by him. There's a couple choices he made with the score that I didn't quite agree with. I know he wasn't really happy with it because he was kind of forced to just do a pastiche of his score for the first film, and he wasn't really that enthusiastic about it, and that does kind of show in the composition of the score. But I've heard worse, but it's also not one of my favorite scores by Jerry Goldsmith. And I think for a film that's like 107 minutes, it goes by at a pretty good pace. I never found it to be that boring. It's just a well-paced film. It does a good job building up the story, and then just throwing out these kills, and then setting things up for the finale. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Damien Omen 2. And until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.